on August 28, 2009, the 54th anniversary of 14-year-old Emmett Louis Till's death, the young African American who was brutally murdered by white men during a visit to his great uncle Moses Rice's house in Money, Mississippi in 1955. Many people, including those who attended Till's funeral and the clergy who resided over it, gathered together for a memorial service in honor of him and in remembrance of his mother, Mamie Till Mobley's efforts to tell the morbid tale of his murder at the Roberts Temple Church of God in Christ, the site of Till's funeral. At the ceremony, after receiving his battered and disfigured body, Mobley had her son laid out in the open casket with a glass panel so the world could see, quote, what they did to my boy. Simeon Wright, who's now 66, who was in the room sleeping with his cousin Emmett the night of his abduction and murder, and who also led the family's efforts to donate the casket to the Smithsonian Museum, said during the ceremony the facts surrounding Emmett's death was still being talked about and should be preserved because his case had not been yet settled in his mind.
It was the longest day. 54 years, we're still talking about Emmett Till. And you wonder why. We're still talking about it because the verdict was unjust. I told someone, I said, if we had settled this 50-some years ago, we wouldn't be here today. It's not settled yet.
Till's murder galvanized the civil rights movement at a crucial moment in history after his death, and the images of his body was first published by the Jet magazine, then carried around the world by the news media. Linda Johnson Rice, a member of the museum's advisory council and chief executive officer of Johnson Publishing Company Incorporation, which produces the Jet and Ebony magazines, said the ceremony was, quote, extremely meaningful, and that she was very fortunate to be a part of the efforts as we pause to remember the legacy and doors that have been opened because of Till's death.
54 years ago, my father, John H. Johnson, founder of Johnson Publishing Company, made the very deliberate decision to cover this moving story in Jet and show the open casket photo that Emmett's mother wanted the world to see. Millions of our readers were outraged by the senseless murder of a promising young man, and in turn mobilized to help start the civil rights movement. Jet was there from the beginning, and has been committed to covering this story for the past several decades. Emmett Louis Till left an unforgettable mark, not only in his hometown of Chicago, but throughout the rest of the world. That's why it's so fitting that the National Museum of African American History and Culture preserve his memory as we are doing today.
Former Chicago Third Ward Alderman Dorothy Tillman put on display many of Emmett's family photos, which included him as a babe to the time of his murder, that she said his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, entrusted her with. She told the audience during the ceremony about the little-known story of how Till's father had been murdered by lynching in Italy under the allegations of rape while serving in the U.S. military, and how the ring identifying the body as being that of Emmett's was the ring his mother gave to him after receiving it from the military after her husband's death. Tillman said that an apology was also issued to Emmett's mother after a city council hearing in Jackson, Mississippi, not long before she died. Tillman also saluted the family for remaining strong throughout the tragedy and thanked the director of the museum for being willing to preserve and to put Emmett's casket on display at the museum.
Of his father, some of you don't know that his father was murdered the same way. And we never knew what happened to his father. And the only thing, he was serving in the army. and he got killed in Italy. And the only thing came back to Miss Mobley were a ring. And that's the ring that Emmett Till had on his finger, which means that this young lady had endured 2 deaths, 2 killings. And when we got through in Mississippi, it wasn't a dry eye in the place. And in Jackson, Mississippi City Council issued an apology to Mrs. Mobley. That was the first time Miss Till Mobley had been back to Mississippi. And she came back to Chicago and she said to the press, "A hole in my heart have been covered." And shortly after that, she died. But I just want to tell your family that y'all have to stay strong. You got a strong family. And I want to salute you for all of these
Emmett
years.
Till's body, which was buried in Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsop, Illinois, in suburban Chicago, was exhumed for an autopsy in 2005 during another criminal investigation into his murder, and was reburied in another casket. While his plot was undisturbed, the glass-top casket was found in poor condition in a storage shed on the cemetery grounds during a police search in July, following the arrest of cemetery employees accused of digging up more than 300 graves and reselling the plots. According to Lonnie G. Bunch III, the director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, the casket, which is currently not in the museum's possession, he said at the time, would be transported to Washington, D.C., where it would temporarily be housed and its condition assessed by conservation and staff at the Smithsonian Museum Support Center.
This donation, though Emmett Till and Mamie Mobley will always be tied to Chicago and Mississippi, but they will now, through the Smithsonian, belong to the nation.
While the precise details of Till's actions remain unclear, he was perceived to have offended Carolyn Bryant, a white woman, by whistling at her while he and a cousin and other teenagers were buying some candy and soda, and thus crossed the racial boundaries of 1955 Mississippi, according to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture press release that day. On June 2007, the United States Congress passed the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime legislation that gives the United States Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation the ability to reopen civil rights era cases that have gone cold with the passage of time. The act authorizes $10 million annually to be spent over the next decade to create the Cold Case Unit, which will be solely dedicated to investigating and prosecuting unsolved cases that involve violations of criminal civil rights statutes resulting in death and occurring before January 1st, 1970, according to a February 20th, 2008 Southeast Texas Legal Journal online post titled, "Legally Speaking, the Civil Rights Cold Cases, a Vow Never to Forget." Earlier in the day, after the press conference, Simeon Wright, Emmett's cousin, told Residence Journal and other reporters that Carolyn Bryant, who is the only remaining living person left, and who was part of the murder case, and who he said is, quote, the instigator in Till's death, should testify to the truth of what happened to Till and, quote, pay for her part in it. But he said Bryant is not willing to do so and, quote, will die with the blood of Emmett on her hands.
But she said that there's no way she was in that truck at 2 a.m. in the morning. Now, I don't know what kind of evidence she had. I don't know who told her to testify for Carolyn. Put her on the trial, put her on the stand, make her testify on the open. But she said, well, there's no way she stayed in that truck that long. I was very upset. Some said that, well, most of them are dead now. I said, yes, most of them are dead. But Carolyn Bryant, it started with her. She was the instigator. She stood alive. And she should pay. But looks like she's going to die just like her husband and her brother. They died with the blood of Emmett Till on their hands. I understand that one of the brothers that was involved, that we didn't know was involved, he confessed on his deathbed. I understand he did. That was Leslie. But as far as Carolyn, up to this day, she has denied everything. And she's going to die with the blood of Emmett on her. No one has to die.
appreciate it.